So, I'm sure we've all seen videos of Bolo, Shaiko, and other pro players flicking to targets with perfect accuracy. While these skills are attainable, they require a ton of aim training and lots of in-game hours. The good thing is that Rainbow Six has many more skills to master than just pure aim, and we can focus on these to speed up our progression. In this video, I'm going to cover three main topics: crosshair placement, pieing corners, and minimizing angles of exposure. While these topics are loosely related to your aim, their execution doesn't require you to be faster or more accurate. If you learned something from this video, please like and subscribe so I can do more of these. Now, let's get into it. Alright, so we're going to start off with crosshair placement. So, you'll hear a lot of R6 YouTubers talk about crosshair placement. Atheno has some really good tips on how to stay at head level by using the buckles on doors and barricades. So you can use these buckles as a visual indication of head level, and you can start to build that habit and know what it feels like to keep your crosshair there. Try this where you're moving back and forth while you're keeping your crosshair at head level. This is a great way to start learning crosshair placement, but you should practice your head level aiming to the point where it's natural and you don't need a visual check in the game. When you do map training, try and check in with your crosshair and see where you let it rest most of the time. I'd say most players are too low. I know I was, and I see it a lot in console players, but some PC players as well. So you need to constantly remind yourself to keep your crosshair up until it's second nature and you don't need to think about it anymore. The reason that aiming at head level is so important is that's where you get the fastest time to kill. In addition, no matter how far away the enemy is, their standing head height will always be at head level. I know it sounds simple, but to get a headshot, you gotta aim for the head. In these clips, you can see that when I keep my crosshair at head level, it's much easier to get a headshot. I end up with my crosshair much closer to my target, and I also don't need to incorporate any vertical movement. This limits the amount of actual aiming I need to do to adjust to my enemy's position. So now that we're thinking about our crosshair and really searching for the headshot, we need to recognize that optimal crosshair placement changes. So if someone's on the stairs, or if they're just on a different vertical level than you, crouching, whatever it is, you need to be ready and anticipate where that headshot's going to be. This is where you need to take the next step and use your context clues, things like map knowledge, drones, callouts, and you need to use these things to predict where the next optimal crosshair placement is. Quickly, while we just talked about it, I want to touch on droning. So info is just everything in R6, and you gotta gather as much info as you can. So when you're attacking, your drone makes it so you don't need to react on the fly, and if you can see where your enemy is before you peek, it allows you to focus on that spot rather than face checking other angles or putting your crosshair at head height when the guy's crouching or lying down. So that's why it's so important to use your drones, teammates' drones. That just makes our job of clearing angles so much easier. Let me know in the comments if you want me to expand on droning more, as this topic probably deserves its own video or at least a more detailed segment. So now that we know that optimal crosshair placement changes, we'll have to learn to take gunfights with that in mind. When you approach a door and you have no info on the other side, you shouldn't rush your peeks, or even worse, just run in without checking anything. You gotta remember, somebody could be anywhere, really, and they could be standing, crouching, or lying down. This is where we implement the next tip of pieing your corners. You need to take your time and imagine where someone could be. Where are the common angles? Think of places you've been in that room. Think of places you've died to in that room. And really imagine where they are in comparison to where you're peeking from. So this allows you to cut the room into angles like a pie, and you can peek these angles individually while staying concealed from all of the other angles. People often call this pieing the angle, so that's where the name comes from, but you effectively cut the room into different pie pieces and give yourself one angle to focus on at a time. Here's a quick example where I'm attacking CCTV on Clubhouse, and you can see that there are 4 places someone could be watching my doorway from. When I peek, I check each of these angles individually instead of just guessing where someone is or just wide swinging. Realistically, you can break up every room in the game like this, as long as you know where those common angles are. That's where your previous experiences come in. If you can do this, you can start to build habits on which angles you need to check, and have a plan in certain areas of the maps when you have to push without info. One more tip for pieing corners is to really commit to each spot and make sure no one's there. I often find myself sliding through all the angles at once and having to flick back really quickly and aggressively just to react to the people that I've missed. And by this time, I've already exposed my whole body. I've walked out all the way through the doorway. So you really got to take your time and check all those angles, because that's how you lose gunfights. You might see some pros slide through their angles, but they often have the reaction time and mechanics to flick back and get the kill, even though they're exposed. So especially for someone like me who's still working on their aim, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are as well, just slow it down for yourself. You know, it's not a race. You've got a full 3 minutes, and if you prepared properly, you can take those extra seconds to really focus on every angle that you need to peek. Alright, now this leads into my last positioning point, where we need to focus on limiting our exposure to multiple angles. This kind of comes down to the fact that you can't aim at multiple angles at once, but you can be shot from multiple angles. So what you need to focus on is having one angle that you're exposed to. On doorways, we use our pieing technique, something we've already learned, right? We're focusing on one angle at a time, and we're only showing ourselves to that one angle. So when you're clearing a room with a doorway, that's how you minimize your multiple angles. Now, it gets a little bit trickier when you're in the middle of a room or there's multiple hallways and the angles aren't really stacked up in front of you, they're kind of all around you. That's when you really need to start thinking about, where are those callouts coming from? Where's the info? Do I have, a hunch maybe somebody's flanking? Those are the sort of things you need to be thinking about when it's not just a simple doorway anymore. Sometimes you want to peek an enemy, but by doing so you actually expose yourself to a new angle without realizing. If you don't take notice of these other angles, you're bound to die long before you ever get to engage your target. You have to take note of your position and see if there are safer ways to peek by making sure you are only exposed to one angle at a time. This is a really basic example, but essentially we have two enemies, one in laundry and the other in freezer. If I peek either angle improperly, I can expose myself to both attackers at the same time. What I need to do is use the cover around me to isolate each gunfight so that I can only be shot by the guy I'm peeking. This is something that's much harder to train without actually playing the PvP modes, and I personally struggle to implement this idea properly. When I'm in ranked, I try to remind myself every so often of my most immediate threats and angles, and how I can limit them. While I'm still working on this, I'm trying to get to the point where I'm not actively thinking about it, and it starts to come naturally. So, I'm sure you guys have noticed that I made most of this video in map training, and I really think it's important to do these things here before bringing them into ranked. A lot of this stuff is simple and easy to replicate, but when you have to do them all at once, it becomes a lot harder. On top of that, you throw in real enemies and ranked pressure, and now it's much easier to lose track of all these smaller details. When I have time, I try to do a map training with both the 1x and ACOG, then usually a deathmatch, and finally I'll head into ranked. When I'm warming up, I'm not going through the motions quickly so I can get to ranked faster. I'm actively reinforcing and focusing on these habits, so that when it's time for ranked, I'm warmed up and I'm used to using these ideas again. Alright, that's all for today's tips, and I hope you really get something out of these. If you have any topics you want me to cover in future videos, let me know in the comments below. See ya.